Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Flat Earth Banjo. Hello, everyone. Hope you guys are listening me. Listen to me, okay? Hello, Seattle Green. Glad to see you here, man. Matthew, New North Carolina, and let me see, Massachusetts is in the house. Hi, great stuff, guys. We got a great show. Okay, Adam Horse is in the house. Let me go ahead and add him to the stream. How's everything, brother?
Hey, g'day, Eddie. I'm good. How you going?
I'm sorry about the miscommunication. Uh, we were communicating through email now, but you know, we got things sorted out. So it's a pleasure for me to have you here. And I just want to say hello here to the chat. Some friends, Sean B. Okay, Sean B. Axis Mundi, Seattle Green, Real Little Soldier, Flat Earth Nation, Megadeth 777. Everyone in the chat, welcome to the show. We have a great show. So, Ross, tell us a little bit about you, brother. It's a pleasure for me to have you here. I've seen you debating some globe tards. So it's a pleasure. Tell us a little bit, and you're going to be sharing your thoughts about the moon, right? So I'm anxious. I have when I bought my P900 a couple years ago, I took a lot of films, and I even got the lunar waves, but I haven't been researching the moon lately. Just concentrating more on the A map, on flight routes. That's my passion. So you have the microphone, brother.
Oh, cheers, Eddie. Yeah, it's great to see you. Been a big follower of your channel for a long time, so this is a real honour to be on it. Um, yes, no worries about the mix-up. Bit of a hassle for me to take a day off on a Monday, especially. So, but I got here. So yeah, I do enjoy the debates, just simply because I like to be a bit controversial, I guess, because that's the best way to bounce ideas around is to talk to people that you disagree with, as opposed to necessarily talking with people you always agree with. So, um, yeah, I think I've been questioning the shape and nature of the Earth for probably 3 decades at least. First discovered a book called Secret of the Ages, and it was supposed to be a hollow Earth book. But one of the evidences it had was that plumb bobs suspended deep into the Earth found that they got further apart, further down, which sort of led to the concave Earth theory that we could be on the inside of the thing. And to me, that made a lot more sense than hurtling through space. If the atmosphere is contained within a giant sphere, for example, then an aeroplane could take off and fly through it, and the atmosphere would appear to be moving with it if we were moving. But then the sunset was really what triggered me to think, well, how could the sun appear to go lower if, in fact, it would have to go back up again? So the flat Earth really made a lot of sense to me. And I think just from talking with people on Facebook and that's a great place to argue with people and bounce off ideas. And people think that a flat earther is insane. And really, if you look at it the opposite way and think to yourself, well, if we're in outer space and we're going to build a spaceship, if you're an engineer and you proposed to everybody in your NASA group or whatever it is, and say, we're going to build a spaceship, we're going to build it so big that all the occupants can sit on the outside surface of it. And it'll be set, because of its size, it's going to attract all the gas and all the water to it. And everybody won't need to wear spacesuits or anything. And you can just hurtle through space as though you're sitting inside or sitting outside in the sun. And it's going to be powered by a thermonuclear fission ball 93 million miles away, and we'll just chase it, hundreds of thousands of miles an hour through the vacuum of space. It's the most absurd proposition you could imagine. So I think flat Earth is really one of the most sensible and sane realizations you can eventually come to when we consider the reality of the world we live upon. But one of the biggest mysteries, I guess you could say, is the moon. It's throughout history, it's been a mystery. It's surrounded by all sorts of folklore. It's in a lot of spiritual things and Wiccan beliefs and all sorts of things. Typically, we consider the sun as the golden sun and the moon is the silvery moon. And I just did a little research this morning just to think, well, where did those symbols come from? The symbol for gold is AU and the symbol for silver is AG. So they're pretty similar. And in fact, I did write a couple of notes. I'm sorry I had problems with my camera setting it up. I've got a stand for it and everything, but
all right, no problem, brother.
It wouldn't sit in the holder properly, and it kept flipping my image so I was upside down. So last minute teething problems there. So I've just got it sitting in on the desk at the moment. So it's not what I intended. But yeah, so silver actually comes from Latin argentum. So that's where the AG comes from. And in English, arg means white or shining. And Sanskrit actually says argunus. So that's where the AG came from scientifically. And whereas gold is Latin was aurum, which stands also for aurora, which was considered the goddess of dawn. So that I never realized that the sun had ever been considered a goddess before. And English word for that is Geolu, Geolu, and from the Germanic Gulpa, Gulpa. So that sort of just gives a bit of history of some of the names of things like the silvery moon, the golden sun. And I think myself, you can't understand the moon without understanding the sun. So, and of course, the nature of light itself. Like I'm happy for you to jump in any time too if you've got a question, but I've got a bit of a question for you is, what is sort of like the typical understanding, especially from a biblical point of view, about the moon and how it does produce its light? Because I think I've got a theory that can fit in with that, but it's just sort of like to hear from, because I don't really get into the Bible side of things, and I know a lot of people
Okay.
say that the moon creates its own light. So,
Yeah. Well, the Bible itself does not have a lot of information. The moon, we get a lot from the book of Enoch.
mm-hmm.
That's the book that really describes the luminaries. There's a couple of chapters about it, and it goes in details about the moon. And I've read that book like 3 times, and it just says that being the lesser light, the sun is 7 times, the light of the sun is 7 times stronger than the light of the moon, and that the moon gets its energy from the sun. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
gets its light like it. No, it doesn't reflect. It says absorbs. Kind of absorbs the light, and then it burns this light back. That's my understanding. Now, the Bible itself, it just says that the Genesis 1 says that God created two luminaries, one to reign during the day, another one, the lesser light, during the night, but doesn't really go into details like how that works.
Okay,
But
yeah,
that's why we think the book of Enoch was removed from the Bible, because it sheds so much light into this cosmology, explains, and they just the powers, just couldn't let us have that knowledge. That's my idea.
fair enough. Yeah, yeah, because it is a very contentious point amongst all circles, especially in the flat Earth community, because a lot of people, they hear this idea about the moon being a cold light, and that can be a bit divisive amongst people. And I always try to set the record straight wherever I come across that, because I've done plenty of experiments with the laser pointer thermometer in great environments for it. I've done control tests and different studies and everything, and there's no doubt about it that an object left in moonlight will get colder quicker than an object left in the shade of the moon in the same sort of environment. Like if you got a big tree, for example, and what I used was 4 coasters. They were cork on one side and hard plastic, almost like aluminium, on the other side. And so I could put 2 of each, or 1 of each, in the shade, and 2 in the moonlight, different sides up, and leave them for an hour or so in the moonlight, come back and do some temperature tests. And the ones in the moonlight do measure cooler. So, but that to me doesn't necessarily imply that the moonlight itself is a cold light. I think that there's more to it than that. And from doing all these experiments and thinking about it, I've sort of thought, well, everything is naturally cooling at night time anyway, and heat rises. So as the warm air rises, it gets replaced by cold air further down. So it has a cooling effect. So the things in the moonlight just have that very gentle, subtle warmth, lifting the heat and accelerating it out faster, replaced by more cool light. So I think that that's a better explanation than saying that the light itself is cold. And I can support that too with other evidence by, on a moonless night, just for the heck of it, had my thermometer with me, and I just did it under a street light. And the road directly under a street light measured a couple of degrees cooler than the same road next to it in the darkness. So it sort of suggests that any light can have that effect, and moonlight is quite a subtle light. So I think that's one myth that I'd like to dispel up front. So it's more convection or radiative cooling that causes this cool effect from moonlight. I think we also have to understand then the nature of sunlight itself to get to the moon. And I've got the whiteboard here. I could possibly draw a diagram, so hopefully I can just explain it in words first. And if you want me to do a sketch or two, I can absolutely jump in and do it. But see, what I think we do have a firmament. My understanding of it, because I've done a lot of thinking and nutting it out and everything. If you look at, I don't know if you can see my map there, but you've got the same map behind you.
Yeah.
When you look at the vast scale of it, like those tiny little island continents, they actually represent thousands of miles. And yet when we do tests like rockets and things that seem to have hit the firmament, they seem to hit around the 60 to 70 mile high mark. So to scale, 60 to 70 miles is actually really, really low. Like it's almost impossible to draw a model of it. So when we try it, when people say, show us the model of the flat Earth, well, it's like, you really have to step outside to see it. It only exists and only works at full scale. So when pilots fly really high and they hit what they call I think it's called the Kármán line, but I think there's a bit of confusion over that too, because they say the Kármán line is 60 miles high, whereas really they seem to hit at about 70,000 feet or something, or 80,000 feet. So I sort of put it in the ballpark range of 12 to 14 miles high is the edge of our atmosphere. So when we send a weather balloon, helium balloon, up with cameras, and they go up really high and they look down, I think, in fact, I sent you some footage that
Yeah,
hopefully you can present a little bit of that, and just to show the different shades. So where the blue light finishes, we go into the blackness of space, and that's what they call the edge of space. And yeah, so we can got a few ballpark figures there, 12 to 14 miles high. I just actually call that firmament B, because it's where the blue sky stops and it starts going pure black. And the pilots say, "Yep, we've reached the edge of space," whereas really they just reached the edge of our atmosphere and the breathable gases, the noble gases especially. So I'm trying to see in this footage here, it's a bit small on my phone, it's a little bit delayed on the monitor, but occasionally you'll get glimpses of a tiny little dot here, and which I believe is the moon. And when you see the big glowing orb, that's obviously the sun. And size to one another from this height, the moon looks tiny, like a golf ball next to a basketball in size. So yeah, there's a glimpse of it there now that I can see.
right here, right?
Yeah, that to me is what I believe is the moon. And it looks tiny, but when we're down on
Yeah.
Earth, it looks the same size as the sun. So my theory behind this is, from years and years of observing the moon, like I've always been a moon fan. It's involved in my life. It's my star sign and everything. Sun sign of Cancer. The symbol of Cancer is the 6-9, which if you look at a full moon, it sort of roughly resembles a yin yang as well. And the yin yang symbol is a symbol of the full moon, I believe, and they're directly opposite one another. So what I believe that moon is, that physical thing, I believe it is a natural looking but artificially created satellite made thousands of years ago by highly advanced technology that's sort of beyond the scope of this discussion, I think, although I can go into it if you're interested. But what I think is that it's held aloft by a combination of things, including diamagnetism, so it's repelled from the Earth. The Earth has got the magnetic center, so that sort of repels the moon, and I believe everything in our universe rotates around Polaris, which aligns with the magnetic north center. So everything is sort of in this swirling, realm of things. And in fact, I've also, I don't know if you can see it on this camera, but I've just got a new clock up there, 24-hour clock. And
Let me see. Hold on, let me remove the screen so I can see better. Yeah. I want to show everyone. Let me see. Remove this. And I want to display your clock. I got one too as a present. Somebody gave me. Hold on, just hold on. Let me see. I'm
I
trying
actually
to
want to,
remove my okay.
I overlay or put a flat Earth map inside of it so that it can sort of match my local time. But we've got the app that does that anyway, so it's not really necessary. But so what I'm suggesting is with a clock is the hour hand represents the position of the sun. So if it's overlaid over that map, then wherever the hour hand is the local midday 12 o'clock. Sorry. And the moon is similar, but instead of taking exactly 24 hours to make a single rotation, it takes 24 hours and 50 minutes. So it's like two hands moving simultaneously. So when you've got a new moon, for example, they're both moving at the same time together, but then the moon just lags that 50 minutes per day. So while it's that close to the sun, we can't see it at all. And then so slowly the sun gets further and further away. So each sunset, subsequently, as it's happening at the moment, we see a larger and larger crescent. That's the waxing moon, because I believe they end up being roughly the same size. So the firmament, which I'm still in two minds as to exactly what it was, but what it is, but several interpretations of the word rakia. There is few, and there's a lot of contention there as well. But the three most popular ones that I have heard is beaten flat like metal or bronze, stretched out like a tarpaulin, and as molten glass. And for somebody who'd never seen a frozen lake ever before, all three of those descriptions add up to being a pretty good description for ice. And so it could well be like a layer of ice, and it could just be floating atop of our atmosphere, much like ice floats on water. The pressure of the atmospheric gases beneath it is what's holding it there, is a possibility. And so I believe that the moon is somewhere quite close to the firmament, and the sun itself, it's not a physical thing, in my opinion. This is all just my opinion, so I'm not trying to say this is gospel truth, but by any standards. But I think that the sun could be several thousand miles high above this 70-mile high firmament, and so it's the way it reacts is kind of like, for want of a better term, I think like an arc welder. When an arc welder has the energy source, it hits the Earth, and that creates this blinding plasma of light, which you see in that high altitude footage. It's a blinding plasma of light, but it doesn't light up anything because there's nothing between the firmament and firmament B. And that's why the darkness of space, because that's the only space that exists. And then within our atmosphere, that energy from that blinding ball of plasma is what stimulates all the various noble gases, which creates daylight. And around the edges of it, the one that needs the least amount of this ionization frequency is neon. That's why we get neon colors at twilight, as it goes between daylight and no night or night. And I think that's even just, I wrote a quick list of the various noble gases too. That the main ones are helium, argon, krypton, neon, xenon, organoson, and radon. What I'm thinking happens is they all sort of stimulate, they're electrostimulated or ionized by the solar energy, and that gives us the blue daylight. Now, argon dominates them all, so that's why the sky is blue, because by dominating all the other colors, that's what it creates. It's a blue-white light. Whereas I think then that the sunlight that hits the moon, it then projects down into firmament B, and that's where it creates this holographic plasma projection of itself. So that's why wherever you look at it from, anywhere on Earth, when you see the moon, you're all going to see the exact same phase. The only thing that's going to be different is whatever side of the equator you're looking up from, it's going to appear inverted, because you're looking at it from different sides. Just like if you drew a 6 on the ground and you stood at one side and looked at it, and the person in front of you looking the other way, you say, no, it's a 9. You say it's a 6. Well, that's all it is. It's just looking at it from different sides. But the phase is the same, because it's basically like a flat holographic plasma projection, but it projects the solar energy that hits the moon. And because the moon is covered in craters and various mountains and whatnot, where there's shadow, no energy is projected in the firmament B. So that's why in daytime, that part of the moon will appear completely invisible, because there's no energy reflected or projected into the firmament, and in the firmament B, sorry, not the firmament. Got to distinguish between the two. It's just reflecting the solar energy to create a perfect replica of the sunlit part of the moon that's facing us. And as you've probably noticed, when you move, the moon seems to move with you as well. So because it's projected from up really, really high, you're basically seeing it through a line of sight through a veil of the atmosphere. So wherever you are, you're looking through a different part of the veil. So that's why the moon can be seen from so much of the Earth at the same time, same with the sun. While, like say in summer when we have 17 hours of daylight, we can still have that in the south, even though technically if the moon was just a single spotlight, that would be impossible. So there's so many mysteries about the nature of light that once you understand we're seeing it through a veil, through an individual point of view towards it, that's how it can cover such a vast area and still only be roughly 60 to 70 miles high at any given time. And so I believe that the plasma projection is only stimulating the specific noble gases of xenon and krypton. And if you do the spectroscopy with all those different gases held in different tubes and put them near a coil, Tesla coil or something, to electrostimulate them, those two gases glow in a kind of a grey-white light. It's a black and white type of light. And so if ever you're out in full moonlight, you can actually read a book. Now, it's a little, strain your eyes a little bit, but you can read via the light of the moon. However, if you saw a coloured picture, it's black and white. So moonlight is a sort of a black and white light, and it doesn't reflect the colours because the colours actually come from the atmosphere itself. And by the gases that are stimulated, by the um, frequency from the sun itself, the power source of all the light. And in fact, I also took a quick note from Wikipedia about krypton, and it says describes it as it's a colorless, odorless, tasteless, noble gas that occurs in trace amounts in the atmosphere and is often used with other rare gases in fluorescent lamps. And xenon is an inert monoatomic gas first identified in the residue obtained by partial evaporation of liquid air, krypton impurity. So it's both of them seem to be what I figure the moonlight somehow specifically ionizes those gases to create the holographic plasma image of it that we see. So that's my basic understanding of the moon. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I know that. I think he's from Tasmania, that professor in the 60s who said that the moon was a plasma, right?
Yeah,
Uh, do you know, since you're a fellow Australian from him, do you know anything else about that professor? Because I've been trying to find more information about him. Not right now, but I tried before. I couldn't find. So what happened to that professor, his team? Do you know anything?
no, I've got no idea. I've never even heard of him before till that video popped up and people started sharing it around. I thought that was quite interesting because I'd never really even considered that the moon could be plasma before, simply because we do see shadows from craters. And it's like, well, how can you get shadows from a light on itself, sort of thing? So if it's producing its own light, you'll never get shadows, and you especially see shadows along the terminator line, between the light side and dark part of the moon. Those particular craters down that line have the most deepest of shadows, and so how could a plasma have shadows on it? That's always a big mystery to me. So why not both? Why not actually have a physical, actual moon way up high that when we see it at night time, it just looks like a star? But the moon that we call the moon is actually the plasma holographic projection. So yeah, he sort of inspired me behind that idea in the first place. And I just made years and years of observations and looking at it and thinking it's entirely possible. And I've got quite a few videos on my channel now. None of them are professionally made. They're all just point and shoot and rant and talk and so forth. And yeah, I like to discuss the moon a lot. So yeah.
Now, back in the 80s, there is also a Japanese professor. Actually, was a team from, I think, University of Kyoto. They declared the same thing: moon is a plasma. So I came across this video in a Brazilian flat Earth website, and it was dubbed into Portuguese. With the and I tried to find the original. I can't find it at all, but it's from the 80s. It's the professor wasn't just himself; was a team, and they were declaring, "No, we have studied. We came to the conclusion that the moon is plasma, blah blah blah."
Yep.
And I've been trying to find that video. I can't find it either. It's I don't know.
That's a shame. And another thing that inspired the idea too is thinking that with Crow 777, how he first filmed this thing called the lunar wave. And I thought that's a real oddity, a bit of a mystery to me. And I think this helps solve that problem too. So if the layer between the atmosphere and the nothingness of space all the way up to the firmament is kind of like a fluid layer, then say if a rocket passed through it or an aeroplane interfered with it or something, that could be like dropping a pebble into a pond of water and it's just creating ripples. And so that lunar wave actually does look entirely like a ripple, and it often comes, one or two of them in conjunction with one another. And so if that's just ripples in this gaseous firmament, that could explain the lunar wave as well. So
Right. Another topic, like you were showing how tiny the moon can be. There is that footage of the rocket, GoPro rocket, whatever, that hits the
far,
firmament, and
yep,
that shows the moon there really tiny. And I have that video is in slow motion showing the moon really, really tiny. And
yeah,
even the sun, if you wear, I bought me a welder's glass, and when you look at the sun, it's really tiny. It's not that big as we think it is.
yeah,
When you put that glasses on, it's really tiny. And the other thing is, a lot of videos on TikTok showing three suns, even on YouTube. But when you put that stuff on, those other extra suns disappear. You only see one sun. So I would advise, people to buy one of those. I bought for $10, a pair of glasses, welder's glasses. It's
Yeah,
excellent to observe the sun. And if you
yeah,
see any three suns, two suns, four suns, put that glass on. Those extra suns disappear. You just see one, you know?
yeah. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because um, yeah, it's a solar filter basically, and that's what welders use because they're also looking at a plasma directly at it when they're welding. So it's so bright, it's like looking at the sun. Something we were taught as kids: don't look at it when people are welding because it's too bright; it can burn your eyes. So that's very interesting that you say that with having a solar filter because I've noticed that too when when people put them on a camera, the sun does look exceptionally tiny. So I think that the
Yeah,
atmosphere has a huge role in the appearance of how big everything looks, and that the camera won't ordinarily pick up on that. It's designed to capture what our eyes see, because that's what looks natural to us in photography. But yeah, by using different filters, we change our perception of things. So and there is even that saying, "We see through a glass darkly," and I sort of think, well, maybe that's how the firmament works as well. Is that if we broke through the firmament and could see the sun on the other side, it may be so bright. And I think even Jesus was accredited with saying something akin to, if you can't even look at the midday sun directly with your eyes, how do you think you could look upon the face of God, which is a million times brighter than the sun? And I thought, well, that's sort of, yeah, it's not in
yeah,
the main Bible, I don't think that's saying, but I have heard it in different versions. Uh,
yeah. Another thing about the firmament, I have this video also in my TikTok compilations. And Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, in the book of Jeremiah, they all try to describe the firmament. Okay, so Jeremiah describes it as a sea of crystal. Okay, he went up to a mountain and he saw the throne of God, but in between him and God, there was this crystal, separating both, a layer of crystal. So that's how he describes, a sea of crystal, or whatever. So
yeah,
it's complicated, to define what the firmament really is.
oh, definitely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Let me
it's funny too when you mentioned how sometimes we see multiple suns, because there is also another theory that there is a second sun, and sometimes in certain pictures, when it's really really hazy and the sun's quite low, sometimes you do see what looks like a second sun. And I even recall some years back seeing a video. It's another one that sort of you see once and then it disappears, you never see it again. But it's an English astronomer, and quite a high up in the Royal Astronomical Society and that sort of stuff. And he was giving a fair income interview where he said that we do have two suns. He wasn't sort of making it up or being joking or anything. He says there is a second one. And I think sometimes we have seen it. Now, whether that's a reflection or something else through the day, I'm not entirely sure. But I'm of the opinion, in some cosmologies, they talk about Lilith being the first wife of Adam. So if Adam is the son of God or whatever, then his first wife being Lilith. Well, then sometimes when Luna or Diana, the other moon, she's looking particularly bright and attractive, Lilith gets jealous and she comes between them and blocks them, and that's how we get the lunar eclipse. I know there's a bit of mythology involved in that, but it could be based on something factual where that is the actual cause of the lunar eclipse. So,
Yeah, my view, Ross, that's my personal view, like just like you have yours. I think everything is alive to God, like, for example,
mm,
there's a passage in the Bible, in the New Testament, when the people were praising Jesus Christ when he was coming to Jerusalem, and the kids were all praising him, and the Pharisees told him, tell them to stop. And he said, well, if they stop, the stones will claim, will, praise him. So just another passage in the Bible when it says, well, God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he's the God for God, everybody's alive, It's not for me, they are dead. But for God, everything is alive. So the moon is referred as she, the sun as he, they have personal pronouns. So
yeah,
this
yeah,
is all very interesting. I think that it can appear dead to me and you, but to God, I think everything is alive, including the sun, the moon, the stones, the trees. That's why when Jesus told the fig tree, you never give another fruit again. It died the next day. You know, And
Yeah.
that's my view, you know.
No, I agree 100%. Actually, I think you've really onto something there. And it does sort of sound a little bit crazy to people who haven't really looked into it. But when I think of the stars, especially the stars, when I look at them, I feel that there's a high intelligence amongst them. And I'm not necessarily saying that they're all like saints and super good. There might be what we would consider evil influences among some of them. I'm not saying there is or isn't, because I think that's just a human construct, and maybe they just look at us as like ants, like we're kind of meaningless. But at the same time, if we're aware of them and we speak to them as we would respectfully and try and get in tune with them, I think maybe that's one of the expressions in the Bible, that the stars will fall to earth. It's not so much that they're falling to the ground, it's that we're bringing their consciousness to earth by appreciating what they are and not considering them to be little specks or giant suns thousands and millions of light years away. Maybe they really are, or we see them exactly in the firmament. That's where their frequency translates into visible light. So that's what we see. But on the other side, they might be highly intelligent, advanced beings, light beings, and as that expression goes, they're seated in heaven. And so if they're somehow, that's related with Polaris, because if they're in adoration, everything's going around Polaris all the time. Well, maybe there's more to what that is too than what we think. It's not just a light in the sky. Yeah, it's
Right.
very interesting.
All right, let me just check if anybody has some questions here for Ross in the chat. Shout out. I haven't been keeping up with the chat right now. So, Ross, I'm going to run a video real quick.
Yep.
Vika Draziv is in the house, and he is the director of, Flatten the Curve, the documentary featuring 6 pilots and Navy submarine experts and everything. And so Vika is putting up another documentary coming up in about 50 days, 2 months. So let me go ahead and I want to run the trailer and
Yeah.
talk a little bit about, let me just find it here. Okay, so hey, everyone, this is Vika Draziv, new documentary coming up in about 2 months. Let's watch the trailer.
From the makers of Flatten the Curve. Truth Frequencies Films. Real Truth Seekers. Directed by Vika Draziv. Alexandra Mirjana. Gene edited. Evelyn Goldman. Keith Cameron Smith. Eddie Alenkar. Gutai James. Coming soon. Are you ready to receive the gift? The mechanical realm. Visit themechanicalrealm.com.
All right, that's the trailer for the new documentary by Vika Draziv. And I'm show the poster here. And it's coming up. I'm going to show the website. There is a countdown there. So the mechanical realm, are you ready to receive the gift? Keith Cameron's been, oh, let me go to the website. Let me share here real quick. So it's coming up in about 50 something days. Let me go here, the mechanical realm. So this is the official website, guys. You can check there anytime, themechanicalrealm.com. And I'm gonna present you the website quickly, and then we go back to Ross. Interesting talk about the moon. So here is the website: 49 days, 13 hours, 23 minutes, and 4 seconds until the release of this new documentary by Vika Draziv, the doc film. We got a little bit about everybody. You can download the poster and share on our social media. Vika Draziv, I think she lives in Australia, this girl here. She has an American accent, but she lives in Tasmania. See, Tasmania, Australia. Eddie, Alenka, I apologize. I tried to film like 6, 7 times, and so every time I went wrong. Gutai J, he's no longer with us. It was a pleasure. We talked a couple times on Facebook, but he has departed this realm. Jean Edith, and Evelyn Gold. And Evelyn was born in Gibraltar, the next to Spain, and Keith Cameron, he lives in Florida. So, guys, check out the website. And if you want to watch the Flatten the Curve, it's in the same website. You can watch commercial free because YouTube has built this movie with ads. It's impossible to watch, but you have a version here in high definition. You can watch again if you want. So shout out to Vika Draziv. He's in the house. And let me share one more thing here real quick. Now, I'm going to be making a video about this pretty soon. David Wise, he just put out a video about a guy asking why you see two sunsets. Well, it's pretty easy. You see here the guy number one. This is his line of view, or horizontal view. But the guy who's taller, or let's say it's one floor up, he's going to see a little bit further. And so with the guy number three and the guy number four, the higher you are, much farther you can see. That's what happened in this situation right here. Okay. So someone posted a video say, "Oh, the Earth is a ball because when you go up the Burj Khalifa building in Dubai, you can see the sunsets 2 times." Well, it's pretty simple to understand. The guy here on the floor, he sees the sunset, but the guy on the top of the floor, he can see much farther. So that's why if you climb real fast, there's like a 2 minutes elevator ride, you can see the sunset again, not because the Earth is a ball, it's just because you are in a different perspective, you can see much farther. All right, so let's go back to the chat here. And so what do you think about that, Ross?
Yeah, absolutely. Perspective is actually one of my favorite topics of all because I've learnt so much about perspective and the nature of light and the nature of so many things simply by looking into flat Earth and listening to the arguments against it. Like the moon, for example, being when people say, well, if it is near and local, we should be seeing around different sides of it, so nobody would see the same phase. Well, it's the same sort of thing then with the sunset, is that it is a perspective thing. And the horizon is purely an artifact of being horizontal to your eyes. All light that we see is in our eyes. So perspective is individual human perspective. So every single time. So even though you might see a picture, then we're so used to looking at other people's pictures, we think, oh, that's what the world looks like. But that's only seen through that particular camera at that particular time. If you had another camera a bit higher up at that exact same moment, you'll see a completely different horizon further away. So yeah, the reason the sun gets obscured in the distance is because of that perspective and the perspective ramp, basically, how the ground, everything beneath you ramps up to that convergence point, and anything that's higher than that, further away past that point, will start to get hidden bottom first. So of course, then the higher you are, then the further your convergence point is going to be. It's just the angle of attack, basically, until the point whereas if you were as high as the moon, for you, the sun would never set. And in fact, maybe even half the height of the moon, the sun may never set. So it's all, yeah, it's obscured by perspective itself. So yeah, absolutely, getting higher is how you're going to see the sun set again and again. So
Right.
yeah.
I have a footage on my channel. It's about 2 years ago. There is this Spanish from, I think, Madrid, it's a city, a team, a university. They sent a balloon at night, and you can actually see the some sunlight in a distance, like the brightness, you know, just like Riboni, the guy, the Vendi boat race. He made a couple of videos about time zones. He's
Oh,
French Canadian. Yeah, he's Ribone. I forgot his
yeah. Okay.
last name.
Yeah, I've seen
So
your
he's
version of it. Awesome.
you know, so he sailed from Europe to North America at night, and he says that 50 degrees latitude north, you can see the brightness even in the middle of the night. You can see at a distance some brightness. That's where the sun is. And and this team in Spain, they did release a balloon at night, very sensitive because they wanted to film the stars. It was the only one video where they captured the stars that I have ever seen. You know,
Yeah.
they did, and they also captured this brightness at a much distance. So I went to timezone.com. I saved the Mercator projection. I converted it into the flat Earth map, and it matches exactly, where they were, where the moon was, and where the sun was to their left.
Definitely.
It's somewhere online.
Yes, I fully believe that the azimuthal equidistant map is a very accurate depiction of the layout of the continents. Now, whether it shows exactly the full, length of that southern continent, as I say, length is in the height, in a sense. The width I think is reasonably accurate, but Australia looks kind of like elongated, whereas I think actually it's been compacted a bit because it was originally put on the globe to squash it in to make it fit to the globe, to make it mirror the northern hemisphere, which is much smaller than the outer hemisphere. And in fact, even the use of the word sphere, I think, I just want to put one little myth to rest about that. It's not a bad word to use because it doesn't necessarily mean spherical as a ball type of thing. A sphere, you can have a sphere of influence, for example. So sphere sort of just means realm. So when we talk about the northern hemisphere, it's the northern part of the half of the sphere, and then the southern hemisphere is the southern part of the half of the sphere, of hemisphere. So I think it's a very accurate map. It's just that some of the distances may have to be readjusted as we learn more and more about this, because it is a globe projection, because the Earth was mapped into a globe in the first place. If they never did it that way, that might show far more accurate sizes and shapes of the continents. A bit like that map that came from that Japanese Buddhist temple that's allegedly 1,000 years old. The shapes of the continents on it far more accurately look like what we consider, for example, Australia to look like. So.
Right. Now, as far as Brazil, we have, if you watch that documentary, The Convex Earth, that documentary, there are a lot of good things about it because they have cartographers, real cartographers, and map makers, and surveyors, and they all agree that in the books, like I grew up in Brazil, the distance in the books does not match reality, and I'll tell you why. You see how in a flat Earth map, Brazil is much wider than longer, you
Yeah.
know? And we grew up thinking that Brazil was much longer, taller, whatever, than wider. But when we drove from, São Paulo. That's where I come from. Okay, so
Okay.
we wanted to go to Bolivia. I had an American friend. We traveled to Brazil. I was already living in the U.S., so we traveled to Brazil and then came to São Paulo. There's a city here called Cuiabá. So we wanted to go. That time I was a big fan of Ancient Aliens. So I
Yeah.
want to go to Pumapunco. I said, "Oh man, let's go to Pumapunco." No, I didn't have a flat Earth map back then. I just had the globe. So look, it's pretty close, from where we are. So let's go. And we drove, man. We drove forever. We drove forever here, thinking that we were going to make it to Bolivia. And then when we stop, the guy said, "Oh man, you have like 24 hours. You have to drive another 24 hours." And still, when you get to, there was a city in Bolivia, he said, "You're going to have to drive another 20 hours to get to Pumapunco." I said, "Are you
Wow.
kidding?" He said, "No, no, man. This is so Brazil is much wider than it appears on the globe, like longer, taller, whatever.
Yeah.
It's a huge distance. And in that documentary, The Convex Earth, the guy says, well, our distance in real life does not match what what the globe is showing. And it's a fact in Brazil. That's why I don't know about Australia, but I think South America is exactly like it is on the Gleason's map here.
Uh,
It's much wider than taller or longer, whatever you can
yeah.
tell.
Well, it makes a lot more sense. The myth of Columbus and how he discovered South America when he was looking for India, because he was uh, decided to go the other way. Whereas when you look at it on this map, South America is actually much closer to sort of Africa and Europe than North America in a sense too, especially if you go slightly south. And I think that's always been another thing with travel too, is when they used to have to sail around Africa, because of the number of pirates and all the rest that would attack from the west coast of Africa. Is if you look on the map, how if you go south from the western part of of North Africa, you're going way out away from the west coast of Africa itself, because it really wraps around to the east as it goes down. Probably
Yeah,
just up a little bit there. Yeah. So, but by going south, according to the compass, you're going away from north, and it's sending you much closer to South America. So by the time they start traveling east again, to think they're wrapping around the bottom of Cape Africa, that's why it's got the name Cape of Good Hope, because you really need a heck of a lot of hope from those roaring 40s winds to push you all the way back around again to start heading up towards Madagascar and then India, which is why the Suez Canal is such an important waterway. So, yeah, navigation, I think, matches traditional expectations as well of navigation, because Africa was basically at that stage the only southern continent that they knew of. The Dutch eventually discovered Australia. That was a good 200 years before Cook, but they only found the west coast of Australia and decided it was worthless as trading, because the people here were quite happy. They'd had nothing of wealth or value to trade, and they went a little bit inland. It was all desert, so they just left it alone for hundreds of years until Cook discovered the east coast of it. So all the old maps don't even have the east coast of Australia mapped on it at all. A lot of them.
all right. So let's go just see if we have any more questions here. Go back to the moon, and let me see here. 19 is just a good year. Okay, so let me remove our screen and go back. Let's talk a little bit more about the moon. So back when I was born in Brazil, so my grandfather, he had a farm and he planted coffee beans, and I
Yeah,
actually, when I was a kid, we went there and I helped them harvest. It's a little like I don't know if you ever seen coffee bean or coffee tree. It
yeah,
grows
yeah. There's
really
a few farms
tall.
around here. We had
So
some.
red fruit, like small fruit. Have you seen them, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I've never
So
seen
we
them up
used
close, but I've seen, yeah, pretty close to them. Yeah, plantations.
okay.
Yeah.
So we when as a kid I went there, we harvested that stuff, and there was a place like a baseball, basketball court, you know, flat and cemented, where we laid all the coffee there during the daytime to dry, under the sun, and had to dry. But at night we had to cover that stuff because of the moon. The moon was beautiful, bright, and I remember because it lightened. In the countryside it's all dark. There's no light. Especially when I was a kid at the farm, we had no electricity there. It was all like candles and fire, whatever, but no electricity. So you go out outside, you go out at night with that bright moon, it's so beautiful, it's you can see everything. But we had to cover all the coffee beans because of the moon, and not to putrefy the coffee. We had to cover it.
Yeah, right.
That's interesting, huh?
It wouldn't have been just because of the dew content in the air, would it, at night time?
uh perhaps so, but we had to cover. I remember my grandfather saying, "No, we had to cover, the bright moon, whatever, and we had to cover that stuff." But it could be also because of the dew, the moisture during the night, the cold. Because south of Brazil gets cold, It's just like Australia. It gets
Yeah,
cold there.
yeah, I've heard it's very similar. My ex-father-in-law, actually, he'd spent a fair bit of time in Argentina and stuff, and he described it as very similar to Australia. He sort of, weighed up the two places to go to. He's originally from Sweden. He became a merchant sea captain, so he got to travel all around the world. And he said he spent a lot of time in Argentina, and just described how similar it is to Australia, as far as the climate and everything's concerned. Eventually settled in Australia. I think it's a little bit more politically stable and so on. But he was the first guy to tell me that the Earth is flat too. At the time, I thought he'd gone insane. Yeah, because he waited till he'd retired. He'd been a merchant sea captain all his life. And it was after he'd retired, he'd also got an amateur pilot's license. So he's had a lot of experience. And when he told me the world is flat, I just thought, what? He's lost his mind. He's losing it. But he used the example actually of the Suez Canal, saying it's over 100 miles long and there's not a single curve to it. So naturally, me back then being skeptical and full of cognitive dissonance, I just assumed, oh well, it's too big to see the curve over that much distance. Everybody thinks it's too big, you won't see it. But when you actually start looking into it, when you really study and you think, hang on, that 8 inches per mile squared is actually a very accurate estimate of the amount of curvature drop that should occur. There should be over a mile of drop over that distance, over 100 miles. A mile of drop starts at 90 miles of distance. And if you think of the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, you see that amount of drop. Well, that's 2 of them. It's half a mile high. So an entire 2 Burj Khalifas stacked on top of one another every 90 miles. It must exist everywhere, all around us. So anytime you travel 90 miles, you've got to have dropped that much of curvature for the world to be a globe. And nobody ever sees it anyway. So where's it compensating for all this lack of curvature? It's flat. That's why there is no curve. There's no drop. The whole thing was just a theory based on the shadows of sticks, for example, which was, if he was trying to do the opposite and try to say, I can prove that the sun is local and the earth is flat, and by measuring the different shadows of sticks at the same time of day, well, that would prove that the earth is flat with a local sun. So it's all a matter of what you want to believe or what you're trying to prove, and trying to back engineer then the observations to fit what you want it to be. So, if you got time to get back onto the moon, I think tides are actually a really good globe killer too. If you want me to have a bit of a chat about tides.
Go ahead. We still got like 15 minutes left, so you can have 10 minutes because all I need is 5 minutes to close. So go ahead.
No worries. So when it comes to the tides, if we understand the globe model, and everything is based on gravity, so the Earth's gravity is at least 6 times stronger than the moon's, and the moon is 240, on average, 240,000 miles away. But the gravity of that is said to pull the oceans towards it, and that's what creates the tides. But we've got 2 tides a day, too high, too low. And the east coast of Australia is the perfect example, because they always come like clockwork every about 6.25 hours, a bit less than that. So every day we know that the high tide will be about an hour later than the day previously. It's 50 minutes, and that's how often the moon recurs in appearance. So for a moon to have a gravitational pull effect on the oceans, and then say that creates a bulge that the Earth spins through, so there's a high tide on the backside away from the moon and a high tide on the side facing it. It makes absolutely no sense, because all of Earth's gravity is holding all the oceans towards the center, and the moon can only be pulling from one side at a time. If it's pulling the Earth through the ocean to create the back bulge, well, that cancels the first bulge. You just can't have it according to the globe model. There's no explanation for tides whatsoever. And also, you cannot pull water. Water is it's a fluid. It's like trying to pick it up with a rake or something. You cannot pull water. You can pull the container, but that means the whole Earth, because the Earth is the container of the water. So the moon is obviously not pulling the Earth. The Earth could be rocking backwards and forwards, could cause tides, but we would be able to detect that motion if it existed. However, if the force that's holding the moon aloft in the first place is a diamagnetic force, as I propose, and the oceans being full of salt, it's electrolytes, it helps in that capacity to keep the moon aloft. As they somehow repel against one another. So underneath the moon, you've got a downward repellent force. Well, that could sort of gently drive tides around either side of it. So, I've seen it plenty of times myself, where the major high tide of the day is actually coming, as you can see the moon coming from the east. It's, way before it's going to be overhead. So hours before the moon is overhead, where it should have the most pulling effect, it's actually pushed the high tide ahead of it. And so conversely, then behind it, it can also be pushing the oceans back the other way. And in fact, in 360 degrees, it's all being pushed away. So that's why the further north or south from the moon's path, they will get their tides a little bit more delayed from the other places. And so that can actually push the tides. And then as the water seeks its level again and flows back, it can sort of suck a bit of extra water out. So it creates a low tide. And then it's got like a push and pull effect. Like if you sit up in a bathtub quickly, the water sort of goes to the other end. But then as it comes back to you, it can splash out behind you, even though you've pushed the first the other way. So then you've got a low tide at your feet, high tide behind you. It's not nearly as severe in the oceans because really 1 or 2 meters of tide isn't much. It's more a ripple on something the size of the oceans. So I think that the moon is in charge of the tides. There's none of this breathing in and out of the Earth's water, because all the tides would be about the same everywhere if that was the case. The amount of pumping and machinery required to do that sort of thing would just be horrendously out of the question. It's a huge amount of water, but on the overall scheme of things, 1 or 2 meters in the shallow water around the coastal areas, it's just a ripple. And I do believe that the moon is responsible for the tides, and that's how we can get too high and too low per day, which is absolutely impossible on the globe. If the globe could come up with a rational explanation for 2 tides a day, or 4 nodes, I'd love to hear it. But I've got years and years and years of experience, just personal experience, watching the tides, playing in the tide, being on the beach, watching the moon. I've always had a moon chart beside me, or somewhere in my house for the last 30 odd years. So I always know the phases of the moon, and I've been very much connected with the ocean, swimming and surfing and riding my bike on low tide beaches. You try and take a push bike on a beach at high tide, it's a nightmare. The sand is too soft and you get bogged and everything. So I'm very aware and experienced with tides and the moon itself. I've always done my gardening by the moon as well. And yeah, I'm 100% certain that the moon is responsible for the tides, because they do coincide with the 50-minute delay of the moon every single day, and as are the phases, in relation to the sun. So that's what I have to say about tides.
Okay. Now I was watching. I don't watch Flight to the Flat Earth at all, but Q&F made a video about, cut a clip. I think he was having a live. Fight the Flat Earth was having a live. He's off in England, if I'm not wrong. I think he's in England, correct?
Yeah.
So Scotland, right? Scotland, yeah. So someone called him during the live stream and said, well, right at that moment, they were having a high tide, in England, the UK.
Yeah.
And the guy said, well, but now look at where the moon is. And the moon at that time wasn't like above the UK at all. It was below the equator. And then so I think Fight the Flat Earth had to cut the guy off, the show, because the guy said, well, you're saying the moon is pulling the oceans up, but the moon is not above the UK right now, and we're having a high tide. So I don't know. The tide is something that I looked at a couple of years ago. I like the Erica Dubé explanations about it, and other people say the Earth breathes, water comes inside and outside, just like we inhale and exhale. So Earth is inhale water and exhales water. I've heard a couple of different explanations, and it's very difficult to know, but I don't know. I don't know much about the tides.
Right. Yeah, I think it was one of your videos you made too, actually talking about waves, and tides and waves are kind of connected. So when we've got a tsunami hit, say, the east coast of Australia, how it has actually wrapped around Australia.
Yeah.
And you detect it on the west coast, but when it hits Antarctica, it doesn't wrap around Antarctica. You don't feel it on the opposite coast at all. So yeah, it's
yeah. And the explanation, the global explanation was, there was this professor. He was on the Modern Day Debate. He was debating Austin, and he gave an explanation. It's because Antarctica has a lot of ice on top of it, and that's why it doesn't wrap around. So it makes no sense at all, man. This is not an explanation, because it's just like you say, well, maybe if you build a building at tall enough on the beach, the oceans will never wrap around because it's too tall. It makes no sense.
Oh, that's right. I mean, you look at ice floating in a glass of water, for example. If you create a ripple or something to upset the ice isn't going to do anything to stop the ripple. It's just going to go with it.
Exactly.
It's not going to affect the waves whatsoever.
As a
Anything.
matter of fact, I have that video here, but I don't want to play. It's a PhD Tony. Don't know if you saw him on Modern
Oh,
Day
yeah,
Debate.
I think I caught that one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, man. His
No,
explanation, like, oh, it's too much ice on top of it.
yeah, right. You just look at any waves. You look at a boat. The boat stays still. The wave passes under it, and the boat goes up and down, but it doesn't stop the wave in any way, shape, or form.
Exactly, man. Exactly.
Yeah,
Antarctica is really interesting because that tsunami, actually, there are many. I was talking about the tsunami in Chile in 1961, was a 9.5 on the Richter scale,
yeah,
and it took 16 hours to wrap around Hawaii, and in 24 hours, it arrived in Japan. Okay, and that one it was crazy. And the one in Sumatra, no, it wasn't Sumatra, it was Indonesia, 2004. That one, it reached Sydney. Okay, it wrapped around Australia, reached Sydney before it reached other parts like in Africa. It never wrapped around Antarctica at all. It should have wrapped it around Antarctica, reached the Atlantic. It never did.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it proves that, once again, that Antarctica is the ice wall around the flat Earth, just
yeah.
like we have here. Let me share the screen real quick again. And actually, I just got hold of USGS, some documents from the 80s talking about the ice wall, and I'll be soon making a video about it. It's
Nice.
yeah, US, the survey, geographic survey, US, United States Geographic Survey
Yeah, yeah.
talks about the ice wall. There are 16 references of the ice wall in that document, and I will be making a video about it.
Excellent.
All right,
Yeah,
Ross, I'm about to wrap up. Today is Monday, here, just like in Australia. I already had people ringing the bell. I got a lot of messages because it's Monday morning.
no,
We work today. We have business. We deal with students. We have like a language school here in Japan, and we have parents. And I'm using my phone, and I can see the messages coming in. So I would like you to, first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to taking your time off, precious time in Australia, work time for being here, to be here. And I want you to say some words for the people who are here specifically to see you and your final words. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I absolutely appreciate you having the time to have a chat, and great to see everybody that's here too. Thanks a lot for supporting me. I think I noticed Shawnee B, he's become a great one of my favourite followers lately. Yeah, every time I put up a video, he's one of the first commenting, so it's awesome. Aussie Gold is another one. Sorry, I'll miss out a lot of names, but yeah, it's always a pleasure just to watch your videos. And if I do get the chance to watch live, I often do. Sometimes at work, we do have a bit of downtime where we can just get on our phone, and often I'm in a place where we have no reception at all, so get to listen to it on the way home or something. But no, I really appreciate you giving me some time to come on your channel and to discuss the moon. And yeah, that's one of the things that has always sort of irked me a bit, when people just blurt out things like the moon creates its own light and it's a cold light and all that sort of thing. Like it's somewhat true, but I think we can get a little bit more scientific about it and say, well, it is still lit by the sun, and it's that sunlight that creates the shadows in craters and so forth. So if we can come across as more authentic towards the people with the traditional view of living on a globe, I think that's the role of flat earthers, is to not come across as looking at it completely crazy all the time and just blurt out things that sounded good at the time we heard it, and just keep looking into them deeper and deeper and understand more and more about the nature of reality and nature of light, nature of everything. So yeah, much appreciated. Thanks you, Eddie.
Thank you so much. And you're welcome if you want to download and upload this video to your channel. Do whatever you want to do. Okay.
Awesome.
And you're welcome to come. I have, let me share my screen again to show a couple of shows I have had. but you are welcome to come back. Okay. So
Definitely.
we had you today. All right. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding again. Next week we're gonna have Pastor Ryan McRae. I want to hear his side, what's going on with him. We're gonna have Robert Tosi, the map maker. He's a professional map maker of Florida, and David Wise will be here for open questions, and he is gonna be answering any questions from the viewers. And we're
Cool.
gonna have author from Italy, Albino Gallupini, excellent wonderful person, and he'll be here talking about his new Flat Earth book. And also, they are organizing a Flat Earth conference in Italy. Kevin Bobick, we missed him a couple weeks ago, but he will be here talking about his line of clothing. And Matthew Hawking will be back. We're gonna conclude Tartaria. We're gonna look at the Khans, Genghis Khans, and how Genghis Khan and his uh, children, whatever. And Jamie Salter will be here. He's gonna be bringing some stuff he's been studying. Right. I wanna ask people if you can just my channel is shadow banned a lot, and YouTube will not allow me monetize at all. I cannot have super chats. I cannot have anything like that. So for anybody, sometimes I get messages. People say, "Oh, how can I help you?" or whatever. You can visit my store, okay, and perhaps you do some shopping there if you want. It would help a little bit, and but whenever you feel like it. So I'm gonna close the show. Thanks one more time, brother Ross, and you will be back here anytime you want, and just let me
Awesome.
know. We will any topic you want to discuss next time, the sun or whatever, just let me know. We will schedule a show. Okay. So,
Beautiful. Thank
guys,
you.
thank you so much. I'm going to drop the link of my store here if you want to visit. And I'm going to close the show again with David J. Carroll song. So I'm going to go ahead and remove you from the chat and myself. Thanks again, Ross. God bless you,
All right.
brother.
Thank you. See you later.
All right. See you. Bye-bye. All right, guys. Thank you again. And let's close the show with David J. Carroll. God bless you. I'll see you next week with Pastor Ryan McRae, and he's going to be talking about his flat earth journey. All right. Thank you again. Let's listen.
Wonderful, magical, celestial light, fantastical, mystical, wonderful sight. Belgian Swiss physicist Auguste Piccard, 1931, first to reach for the stars, was the first to explore the air view stratospherius, a scientist curious to see what was there. An aluminium black ball gondola, helium balloon, hydrogen with photos and instruments, sailed towards the moon, rose in just half an hour, 52,000 feet, 10 miles up, 10 temperature, up a dead drop in heat and cold, but disproving gravity. Wonderful, mystical, beautiful sight, flat line separation of black from blue light, a world run by false make-believers, hiding in shadows, stealing our light. Mystical, fluorescent light, wonderful, magical, awesome, yes, stealing our light. Wonderful, let there be light, supernatural, eternal, supernatural. Up we go, higher than rainbows, higher than mountains, above cumulonimbus, higher than 60 around us, but right round behind us, any height that you dare. The sun and the moon both revolve around us, to forever short time pass intelligently there. You'll never beat us, you'll never defeat us, no more you deceive us, see through you like air. Kipper and Picard were the first ever known to reach up there. Divine luminescent light, mystical, wonderful. wonderful celestial light. So what was their eternal testimony? What did they report back to humanity? Said it seemed like a flat disk far as eyes can see, with an upturned edge fading into infinity. A mystical, ethereal, celestial sight, a divine creation, a clockwork of light, designed hid by deceivers and false make-believers, still cowering in shadows, still fearing our light. Here we go, higher than Everest, higher than airplanes, above zero cumulus, higher than air. A level horizon, 360 around us, no motion beneath us, no spinning, no stars on the firmament, turn along around us to forever, short time past geometrically there. You'll never beat us, you'll never defeat us, forever beneath us, we see through you like air. Mystics of illuminant light, fantastical, magical, bright, we see through you like air. Magical angels of light, beautiful, wonderful, celestial light. The first to see truth when they reach for the stars, explorers and physicists, Kipper and Picard. Never you'll defeat us, forever beneath us, we see through you like air.